The track was perfect. Except Quincy wanted to trim the intro. Michael's response was 3 words nobody expected. "That's the jelly." It was late 1982 at Westlake Recording Studios in Los Angeles. The air conditioning hummed low, mixing with the faint buzz of equipment that had been running for 11 hours straight. Quincy Jones sat behind the massive SSL mixing console, his fingers drumming a slow rhythm on the armrest. Michael Jackson stood near the back wall, arms crossed, headphones dangling from one hand. Between them, the speakers played a bass line on loop, 4 notes repeating in a hypnotic pattern. Simple. Bruce Swedian, the recording engineer, watched both men from his position at the board. He'd worked with Quincy for years and knew that look. The producer's jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the waveform display. This was the look Quincy got when he was about to make a call nobody would like. The bass line looped again, that same rhythmic pattern. 29 seconds of it before the drums even entered. 29 seconds of the same 4 notes with nothing but a subtle synth pad underneath. Quincy reached forward and hit the spacebar. The playback stopped. "Michael," Quincy said, not turning around, "we need to talk about this intro." Michael didn't move from the wall. "What about it?" Quincy swiveled his chair to face him. "It's too long. 29 seconds of intro before anything happens. Radio won't touch it. Program directors want to grab listeners in the first 5 seconds. This is almost half a minute of the same bass line." Michael's expression didn't change, but Bruce saw his grip tighten slightly on the headphones. "The intro stays," Michael said quietly. Quincy leaned back, studying the younger man. They'd been working together for years now, since Michael was still a teenager. Off the Wall had been a massive success, but this album, Thriller, had to be bigger. The label expected it, the industry expected it, Michael expected it. That pressure sat in the room with them like a 4th person. "Michael, I'm not saying cut it completely, just trim it down. Start at the 15-second mark. We keep the vibe, but we get to the vocal faster." Quincy's tone was patient, reasonable. He'd had this conversation with dozens of artists over his career. Most of them listened. Michael shook his head. "If we cut the intro, we lose what makes people want to move. That bass line needs time to get into your body." But here's what Quincy didn't know yet. Michael had been testing this intro for weeks. He'd played it for dancers at rehearsals, watching their feet. He'd played it late at night in his car, watching how long it took before his own body responded. 29 seconds wasn't random. It was calculated. It was the exact amount of time the human brain needed to lock into that rhythm, to anticipate the drop, to crave what came next. Quincy stood up and walked to the console, pressing play again. The bass line filled, the room with its steady pulse. He let it run for 10 seconds, then stopped it. "Hear that? It's repetitive. It's going to test people's patience." "It's supposed to test patience," Michael said, finally moving from the wall. He walked closer, his voice still soft but firm. "That tension is the point. When the drums finally come in, it feels like a release. If you cut the intro, you cut the release." Bruce Swedian had been quiet this whole time, but he'd been paying attention. He'd recorded that bass line himself, watching Michael play it on the synth, adjusting the tone until it sat in a pocket that was somehow both smooth and aggressive. The line was simple, yes, just 4 notes, but the tone was unlike anything Bruce had heard. It wasn't a traditional bass guitar. It wasn't a typical synth bass. It was something in between, and it had a clarity that cut through everything else in the mix. Quincy rubbed his temples. They'd been at this for days. Not just this song, the whole album. Every track was a negotiation. Every decision felt massive. He respected Michael's instincts, but Instincts didn't always translate to hit records. Sometimes you needed experience. Sometimes you needed to know when to edit yourself. Michael, I've been producing records for 25 years, Quincy said, his voice measured. I know what works on radio. I know what program directors skip past. A 29-second intro is a risk we don't need to take. Wait, don't skip this part, because what Michael did next wasn't what anyone expected. He didn't argue, he didn't raise his voice. He walked over to the couch against the far wall, sat down, and looked at Quincy with an expression that was somehow both respectful and immovable. Quincy, I trust you. You know I do, but this time you have to trust me. The room went still. Bruce kept his eyes on the console, pretending to adjust a fader that didn't need adjusting. These moments were delicate. Quincy and Michael had a partnership built on mutual respect, but every partnership had pressure points. This was one of them. Quincy crossed his arms. Explain it to me, then. Why does this intro have to be exactly 29 seconds? Michael leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Because that's how long it takes. When I play it for dancers, I watch them. For the first 10 seconds, they're listening. By 15 seconds, their shoulders start moving. At 20 seconds, their feet tap. At 25 seconds, they're ready. When the drums hit at 29, they explode. If you cut it shorter, they don't get there. The build-up doesn't work. Quincy listened, his face unreadable. He'd worked with obsessive artists before, perfectionists who agonized over every detail. But Michael's obsession was different. It wasn't about ego or control. It was about the listener's experience. Michael thought about how music moved through a body, how rhythm worked on a neurological level, how tension and release created emotion. And the bass line itself? Quincy asked. You don't think it's too simple? 4 notes, same pattern, no variation? Michael smiled slightly. That's the jelly. Quincy blinked. The what? That's the jelly, Michael repeated. That's what makes me want to dance. It's simple, yeah, but simple doesn't mean weak. Simple means it gets in your head and stays there. You can't forget 4 notes. You try to forget them, and they come back. What happened next, nobody saw coming. Bruce Swedian spoke up. Quincy, Bruce said carefully, I've been mixing this track for days now. Both men turned to look at him. Every time I start a mix, I loop that intro while I set levels, and every single time by the time I get to the 20-second mark, I'm nodding my head. I don't decide to do it. It just happens. Quincy looked at Bruce for a long moment, then back at Michael. The younger man hadn't moved from the couch, hadn't pushed, hadn't pleaded. He'd just stated his case and waited. That confidence, not arrogance but certainty, was something Quincy recognized. He'd seen it in the great artists he'd worked with. Ray Charles had it. Frank Sinatra had it. That was the bone-deep knowledge of when you were right about something, even when everyone else doubted. Quincy walked back to his chair and sat down heavily. He pressed play again. The bass line started, that insistent 4-note pattern. This time, he didn't stop it. He let it run. 10 seconds. 15. 20. At 22 seconds, his foot started tapping. He didn't notice it at first, but Bruce did. By 27 seconds, Quincy's head was moving slightly. When the drums finally crashed in at 29 seconds, something in his chest released, and he understood. 1 second. This is where it turned. Quincy stopped the playback and sat in silence for a moment. Then he turned to Michael. The intro stays. Michael's face broke into a wide smile, the kind that made him look younger than his 24 years. You feel it now? I feel it, Quincy admitted. I still think it's a risk, but you're right. The build-up is the point." He paused, then added with a slight smile, "Though I have no idea what the jelly means." "It means the thing that makes it work," Michael said, standing up. "The thing you can't explain, but you know it when you feel it." Bruce Swedian pulled up the session file and looked at the timestamp. They'd been debating this for an hour and 7 minutes. In the grand scheme of the album, it was a small moment, but small moments had a way of becoming defining ones. Over the next few weeks, as they continued working on Thriller, that bass line became a reference point. Whenever they debated a creative choice, someone would eventually say, "Is this a jelly moment?" It became shorthand for trusting instinct over convention, for believing that sometimes the unconventional choice was the right one. Bruce Swedian would go on to mix Billie Jean 91 times, not because the first mixes were bad, but because he and Quincy kept trying to improve it, kept tweaking the levels, kept searching for perfection. By mix 70, they realized they'd been making it worse. They went back and used the second mix, the one from early in the process when everything still felt fresh and instinctive. Sometimes you had to trust the jelly. The part you can't miss is what happened when Billie Jean was finally released. Radio program directors did exactly what Quincy predicted. They looked at that 29-second intro and hesitated. Some stations cut it down. Some skipped the song entirely at first. But then something unexpected happened. Listeners started calling in, requesting the full version. They wanted that intro. They needed it. The stations that had cut it short started playing the full version. The tension and release that Michael had insisted on, it worked. It worked because he'd understood something fundamental about how humans respond to rhythm, about how anticipation creates satisfaction. The bass line became one of the most recognizable in music history, not despite its simplicity, but because of it. 4 notes, repeating, burrowing into the collective consciousness of popular culture. Decades later, you could play those 4 notes for someone who'd never heard the full song, and they'd know it. They'd feel it. That was the jelly. Quincy Jones would tell this story in interviews years later, always with a mixture of pride and humility. "Michael was 24 years old," he'd say, "and he taught me something I should have already known. Sometimes the artist sees things the producer can't. Sometimes you have to get out of the way and let the jelly happen." Notice what Michael did right here. He didn't win the argument through force or ego. He won it through patience, through explanation, through making Quincy feel what he felt. That's a rare skill. Most artists, when challenged, get defensive. Michael got clearer. He found the words to describe something that existed beyond words. He made the case not for his vision, but for the listener's experience. Bruce Swedian kept detailed notes on every session. In his journal entry for that night, he wrote, "Michael insisted on the full intro. Quincy resisted. Michael said, 'That's the jelly.' I didn't understand what he meant until I felt my own foot tapping at the 22-second mark. Sometimes the artist knows. Sometimes you just have to trust the jelly." Billie Jean went on to spend 7 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. It became Michael Jackson's signature song, the track that defined his solo career, the song that proved he wasn't just a talented kid from the Jackson 5, but a visionary artist who understood music on a level most people never reach. And it all came down to a 29-second intro that almost didn't exist, saved by 3 words that didn't make sense until they did. That's the jelly. The thing you can't explain, but you know it, when you feel it. The moment when simplicity becomes hypnotic. The space between what sounds right on paper and what feels right in your body. Michael Jackson understood that space better than almost anyone. He lived in it, he trusted it, and on that night in 1982, he fought for it. The intro stayed, the bass line stayed, the jelly stayed, And music history changed because a 24-year-old artist knew when to stand firm, knew when to trust his instinct over experience, knew that sometimes the best arguments aren't made with words, but with patience and presence, and the quiet confidence that comes from being absolutely certain you're right. That's how you change music. Not by yelling, not by demanding, but by saying 3 words that don't make sense and then making everyone in the room feel exactly what you mean.